ክቡራት ተኸታተልቲ ንሎሚ ብቴሬዛ ኪዳነ ዝቐርብ ስርዓተ ምሕደራ መንግስቲ ኣብ ልዕሊ ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ዘውርዶ ዓመፅ ብዝብል ናይ ዝተዳለወ ኣጋይሽን ኣባላት መርበብ ኤርትራውያን ደቂ ኣንስትዮን ዝተሳተፈኦ መደብ ዘተ እንሆ ከፋፊልና ክነቕርቦ ኢና። ሰናይ ምክትታል ይግበረልኩም።
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to ask everyone to mute their mics before we start. Good afternoon to those who are joining us from the US, and good evening to those who are joining us from Europe. We are having this discussion today because of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which started on the 25th of November and will end on the 10th of December under the global theme, Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, and Collect. Our theme for today is state violence against women, and we will discuss how the state can be a catalyst of violence against women. And to help us facilitate this discussion, we have invited some of the most proactive activists that I know from the Global South. Dr. Namrata Jain, who holds a doctorate degree in literature and has taught literature and gender in the University of Delhi for over a decade. Namrata is an activist, and she's a theater activist. She uses theater as therapy and has worked with women and children in India on programs such as menstrual health, hygiene, domestic violence, rape, and trauma. Currently, she's working as a survivor advocate at the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program. Namrata also holds a second MA degree in Asian Studies from OU. With equally impressive resume is Dr. Anima Dankour. She is a recent graduate from the Media Arts Program. Her research interests include cyberfeminism, intersectionality, African feminisms, with particular emphasis on online activism by feminist movements in Africa. She's also interested in female-authored movies, African movies, and their role in gender discourse and gender relations on the continent. Thank you very much to Namrata and Anima for joining us today. So what I will do is start with some questions to help us guide our discussion for today, and our panel can respond to these questions. And then I will leave the floor to our participants, and our participants can ask questions and give us some comments and suggestions and share their own experiences with regards to gender-based violence that is promoted by the state. All right, so I think we'll start with Namrata, if that's okay. If you could just share with us how you would define state violence from a global point of view, and then we'll go on to you, Anima.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you everybody on the panel. So in terms of the state violence, I think especially today when we look at the nations and economies worldwide, and given the fact that everybody's racing to be modern and at least on paper trying to be inclusive, you don't encounter direct statement of violence. But having said that, and I'm also coming from my own context, the Indian state, but at the same time, there are these pockets of power that are constantly created with the support of the state and the existing patriarchy that are constantly working against women with little things like education programs, opportunities of work, what are the kinds of systems of protection that the state has in cases of sexual assault or rape or trauma. So I'm trying to, and also let's say, when we look at things like economy or what is the portion of the economy or the funds of the country is devoted to women's welfare and health and education, reservation in jobs or opportunities for jobs. I think when we look at those larger pictures, we get an understanding of the violence which is more subtle and constantly getting perpetrated with a very, very systemic growth. So those are the areas that I would like to focus on, not minimizing or not considering the direct violence that takes place any less. But what I want to say is that there are campaigns and there are organizations that directly deal with direct violence against women, whether it's organized by state or not. Uh, but then there are problems, and then there are versions of violence that are not addressed by anybody, that actually do not find platforms for representation at all. So that is where that would be my area to talk about today, where you cannot directly point a finger at the state saying that this is state sponsored, that this was a program organized by the state, but the state did not stand up for its women. The state did not put in laws and policies to protect its women. And that kind of, going around the subject, or the very underhanded silence, that the state maintains on concerns such as, and this is a concern in India, when we talk about sexual violence or assault, when we talk about rape, when we talk about opportunities of to work or education. And I think it is important to establish here that when we say an Indian woman, the category is not monolithic. We have caste, class, and religion and region-based identities that constantly keep women at the margins, and sometimes with margins within margins. So, those are the areas that I would like to, further in the conversation, actually talk about and bring about. So that is where I think I want to talk about today.
Thank you, Namrata. Anima?
Thank you. Namrata, you hit the nail right on the head. I think every time we talk about state violence, we assume that there's a war and women are being raped, which happens a lot, especially in modern states. It happens, people cover it, people are not even able to talk about it. However, we must also understand that states, when we talk about state violence, it's rooted in structural violence. So structural violence is when organizations, is when institutions of states put up certain laws, or sometimes they don't even say anything, become silent, just like Namrata said, on certain issues, and that particular issue could harm women. And what makes this very even sad is that we can't pinpoint and say, okay, the government intentionally did this, but indeed, through their silence, through their inaction, and through certain enactments of laws, they are conditioning violence against women. So for instance, I classify it into two. So by omission and commission. So commission meaning that the government is implementing laws or is enacting a certain bylaws that restrict women's freedom or rights. So just like some parts of the United States, including the state of Ohio, where I am, restricted reproductive rights for women, even though they think that it's not violence, it's violence against women, because whilst you are restricting the reproductive rights against women, you are taking resources that needs to be put into places where it can guarantee safety for women's reproductive rights from them. And then the government is deciding what women should do with their reproductive rights. Then omission is like saying silence. Like for instance, we understand that when we talk about all of these issues, intersectionality is important. The people that is affecting the most is Black women. For instance, we go through a lot of these issues and nobody bats an eye because it's not affected white women. And normally the government or normally the state pays attention when it's affecting white women. And so it is very important for us to know that when the government is silent on issues that are affecting women, so for instance, they're not providing gender education or how to deal with gender-based violence in government institutions, when continually people are being raped in government institutions and they are made to sign NDAs. That is part of state violence against women. And I agree with Namrata in a lot of ways, because in as much as we always assume that we have to see some kind of a physical altercation between people before we can call it violence. Violence is psychological. Violence can be emotional. It can be all these little elements that we put women through. It exists in our institution, educational institutions. We realize even in higher education, women are finding it very difficult to find mentors, because there's this structural violence that exists within our institution that prevents women from even mentoring each other. You either don't see them there, and even when you see them there, the kind of microaggressions that are perpetrated against women do not even give them the confidence to rise up or even discuss certain issues that bother them. It happens in health. I always want to bring the focus on all parts of the world so that we understand that this is really happening to every woman everywhere, not just people always assume that when we talk about state violence, it has to do with Africa. But imagine that in the United States, studies have shown that Black women are not believed when they go to the hospital. It doesn't even matter how much money you have. Because Serena Williams was rich, she's very rich, but she went to the hospital, she almost died because they didn't believe her. All of that is violence against women because it's in the reproductive and the health system. Let's talk about economy. The fact that women are still fighting for equal pay is violence against women, because we know that the more economy has been used as a tool to subjugate women all over the world, because sometimes the societal apparatus make sure that money is always in the hands of men. Women everywhere suffer because of that. And so if women are highly qualified in institutions and then they are given less of a pay than men, that is also classified as state violence, because the states have intentionally omitted certain things that could help safeguard women's economic freedom. And not safeguarding women's economic freedom constitutes violence against women. And then you can see that all this comes not just through health, education, economy, but every aspect of our lives. The fact that we are still talking about just around July, people were raped in Nigeria, and we still don't have a particular law that can really say, okay, if you do this, this is what is going to happen to you. But then people still argue like, okay, well, but this person's the husband, so really doesn't even matter with the husband. That shows that the state is being complicit in violence against women. So I think Noretta and I have the same trajectory to addressing this. And it is important that we situate the conversation surrounding intersectionality, surrounding issues that affect modern women and women across the world, and also picture it in a larger frame so that we don't assume that it's only the so-called third world countries that continually do that. In fact, still neocolonialism is reinforcing state violence. Every institution of oppression and subjugation that continually go on, as we'll find out later in our discussion, contributes to state violence.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Namrata, and thank you, Anima. And I want to go back to the point of intersectionality. The reason that we're having this discussion in the first place is because we want to highlight that point that women do share similar experiences across the globe. And then there is that intersectionality, there is that interconnection. Most importantly, how states around the world can also be catalysts of violence, and how women across the globe can work together to fight against states and structures that perpetuate patriarchy and oppress women. To add to what you both have shared with us, I would also would like to bring it a little bit closer to home to Eritrea and add the fact that the state also oppresses women in the guise of national building, in the guise of protecting the state, and women's issues in these cases, especially in post-conflict societies or societies that are ridden with violence, women's issues tend to take the back seat. And that is what I would also like us to address a little bit in our discussion today. But I agree with you. and in the fact that state violence is about how the state generates violence through its laws and policies that can discriminate or that tend to discriminate women. So moving on a little bit, and as you both have discussed, you would want to focus or to narrow our discussion a little bit more to your geographical locations. I will start with you, Namrata. What does it look like within your specific geographical location or your geographical areas of interest in your research? What does state violence look like, to bringing it to narrow our discussion a little bit more?
So for this, I think I would actually like to go down a little into the history, and especially the time when India gained its independence in 1947. What we were struck was with a partition, and Pakistan and India became two different nations. But since it was orchestrated along the lines of religion, Pakistan was formed on the basis of people following Islam, and this was something that was triggered by the exit policy that Britain adopted. That it introduced the two-nation theory, and that was, I think, it was, some kind of a massage to their hurt ego, that if we are forced to leave, this is what we're going to leave the countries with. And why I'm going back to the history is that this, the Hindu-Muslim divide between India and Pakistan has continued to sour, let's say, relations, not only until today, between the two countries, but also within the country, within India. And why I'm going back to that is probably the most heinous and the most outrageous form of state violence allowed, perpetrated, and that has existed in the history of both the countries. Because when partition was announced, it was definitely not a meditated decision. So as Britain had done, it just started drawing lines on a piece of paper, and the two countries were formed. And I'm talking about the northern part of India, especially the state of Punjab, where half the people were overnight told that, oh, you don't belong here anymore because this is a different country, and you belong to a different religion, so you need to leave. And this caused a lot of economic, social and cultural distress for people. And because they had to leave their homelands, and there was a lot of aggression about the new nation forming, and India was represented as a woman. So this has been in the history of a lot of countries who were gaining independence after being colonized, that the country was being equated to a woman, and the men folk of the country started equating pride and respect and dignity with the woman figure and the country. Now, in the process, what happened was, when partition was announced, the easiest tool that the men folk thought to them was to start raping the women of the other religion and the other country. So I'm not saying that A country did this to B country. Both the countries did that to each other. What I'm trying to say here is that any sense of aggression or sense of identity was getting translated into violence against women. So that is the most stark, and it becomes all the more difficult because my family has been through partition. We did move from Pakistan to India. I mean, earlier it was all undivided India, but now that part is in Pakistan. So my family migrated, and a lot of incidents that constantly keep coming back to you, and it all translates, or it all boils down to that I can picture this as violence against women in one form or the other, whether it was women being raped, whether it was women being asked to hide, not be accepted by their families after partition or after independence was settled. A lot of women had to change their religions, were forcefully married off, sometimes to protect the family honor. If they had been raped, they were just married off. And a lot of them committed suicides or were actively killed by their own families. So at the end of the day, the larger casualty was the women folk. Okay, so that is one instance that, and it is definitely a point of contention ever since the independence and partition, the state of Kashmir between the two countries, and we have seen its lasting impact upon the people living in Kashmir, and more so the women living in Kashmir. And it has taken different forms of violence, it has taken different directions of violence, but I would say, the recipient of state sponsored violence and the silence of the state and then the violence has constantly been the women. And even now, if I were to look at the scenario today, it is not actively stated, or the state will not organize a program, or will, it's mindful to create policies, let's say, save the girl child and so on. Given that India is a patriarchal society, we also have suffered from female feticide. So the initial governments had introduced programs to save the girl child, all of that in place. But even today, the rage and anger is expressed first in the form of rape. Uh, and because in the history of our country, and even now, every time that there is a riot, uh, a religious riot between the Islamic and the Hindu groups, the first casualty is women and girl children who are raped or killed. So that has been, almost as if a pattern or a constant, and that is where the aggression is, or if there is retaliation against, I would say that people are undecided as to how to find a solution to this. So the easiest solution is kill the rapist, incarcerate the rapist. But we're not looking at, we're unable to find solutions despite policies, despite NGOs, women organizations, activism, laws, how to navigate this problem, how to address this problem and end the problem. And it is not that it is comfortable to go on living like that. I come from the capital of the country, and it is called the rape city of the world. I come from Delhi. So I understand when I say that it continues till today, and I'm not trying to find a justification or a reason for this behavior to exist in the partition of the country, but also the larger scope of it. That have we provided safety to our women citizens even after independence and after so many years of independence? So I think these are the areas that I would, in terms of understanding state-sponsored violence, and then the silence of the state, and its inability to find solutions and give women a more safe citizenship of that country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Namrata. Anima, would you like to share with us? Yeah.
I just wanted to say something about what Namrata just said. It is very sad that in most institutions, people use rape as an act of, it's like we are using this to warn the woman, or to silence women, or to oppress women. Because in Ghana, there's something they call gala, like several men raping a woman. In fact, recently there was a brouhaha on Ghanaian social media platform because somebody told an activist that if you don't take care, I'll bring a lot of men to your house and rape you. And for them, it's like a weapon of silence. It's like, how dare you, rapist? So when Namrata was saying it's like some punishment, like once anything happens, the consequences to rape is very true in all societies. And I remember discussing this with someone, that how is it even possible that somebody could be so confident to write this on social media and people liked it, so many people liked it. How is it even possible? that people are justifying that person's case because, oh, this woman is too loud, man. She always says this, so she needs to be tamed with rape.
And so using rape as a weapon, you mean?
Exactly. That is something very sad because we have a society that we don't have the state protecting women. So it's easy for men to say that, because if you knew that if you say that you could go to jail, if you knew that there will be consequences for that, if you knew that the social structures will not support such statements, there's no way you could mention this. So just like Namrata, I think it's the violence against women, especially in Ghana, is definitely rooted in colonialism. We cannot take colonialism out of anything. Indeed, before the colonists came to Ghana, I wouldn't say we had a perfect society. That's not true. Patriarchy existed everywhere. But especially for where I come from, the ethnic groups in the Akan areas, women really had a lot of agency before colonization. In fact, our kinship women women were like heads of household because we had matrilineal system where we came from. Women had their own farms, they did everything on their own. They had a lot of agency in politics because they selected the king. And a woman could be a king. It doesn't matter if somebody gave birth to a woman, the woman is going to be a king. It wasn't like, okay, let's skip the woman and go to another person because we didn't find this. And I think what happened during colonization is that the British were shocked that this existed. Wow, look at what the women are, because they had their wives sitting at homes, not contributing to politics, not having any agency in any decision that they made. And they decided, okay, we need to destroy the structure. So in the so-called formal education, women were sidelined. Women were not going to school. For them, women should be in the domestic sphere. So women started, just have to keep the homes alone and not be involved in the so-called public sphere. That's why I always have the issue of private and public sphere not really working with Black women, because we've always been out. We've been slaves and we've always been working for this so-called slave master. So, but I think what is hurting Ghana the most is that we learned the way of the British, and then we could not decolonize the knowledge they brought to help suit us. And so we have institutions where men are always at the top. So even in politics, women are not really represented in politics. Remember, all of this is violence, because when women are not there, we cannot talk about the things that are happening to us. And women, it was, I think in 1990 that they started encourage that. Oh, they even have music. They start forming songs, send your girl child to school, like encouraging women to go to school, because they've learned that women are supposed to be in the domestic sphere, stripping all the power even in the domestic sphere from women. Because if you understand Ghanaian politics, Ghanaian women, market women have saved Ghana a lot of times. When Ghana didn't have anything as a Ghana, because they have the power, they have the economic power, but they stripped all of that away, making it seem like if you're in the market and you are working, you are nothing. So such reinforcement gave men more power to, I think it strengthened patriarchy in Ghana. That's what I would say. Colonization strengthened, it's really brought down everything and strengthened patriarchy in Ghana. But then too, we also have certain culture that's kind of continually reinforces violence against women. Let's talk about the witch camp. I don't know if you've heard about the Gambaga witch camp in Ghana. It's a very popular witch camp where they keep very old women, frail women, let's say women who have lost their husbands. They keep them there. They know the kind of women they target. They know they target the low income women who don't have enough, who don't have affluent families, and they put them there and maltreat them because they are witches. And it's so sad that the government of Ghana keeps looking on this, waiting for foreign NGOs, UN, and all of those foreign NGOs to come and say, oh, we are coming to save Gambaga witch camp. What about us? How can't you institute a law if you have a law that says that if you send somebody into that witch camp, if you are operating a witch camp, you'll be in trouble? There's no law. There's no law like that. So I don't know if you heard, but in July, they killed a 90-year-old. They just lynched her because she's a witch. So when they see that they are okay, you are still useless, then they kill you. And this is so sad, because every woman is going to get old one day. And so if somebody feels that you're a witch, then you'll be sent to the witch camp, and then it can happen to you. The fact that the government is silent on these issues, and they only come out to say, oh, we are trying to work on this, and it is being left in the hands of activists to bring this out. Activists are calling people out. Activists are fighting so that laws will be enacted, that so that the so-called witch camps will be closed in Ghana. Is crazy, because we've had independence for a very long time. And definitely, even though certain cultures like the Trokosi system, where they send women to serve gods, so they send very young women, from the age of 3 years old to 15 years, to men, normally men fetish priests, to serve them. Like the gods have told them they should bring this young woman. They sleep with these women, they rape women, these women. The fact that that one people fought and it's against the law, but still it goes on in certain rural areas because the government is not vigilant enough, it's not putting enough. Sometimes there are things in the law, but people are not really practicing it because we are not putting enough structures there so that it will seep into the traditional communities. So it's happening, even though I should say that now Ghanaian women are becoming very conscious of such issues. We have a lot of activists, and I'm proud to say they are not foreign activists, but they are African activists coming from all different parts of Africa.
We'll talk about the activists a little bit later, what women activists are doing.
Okay.
But if you would like to add more about what state violence looks like, please go ahead, Anima.
So I would say indeed, if, we are still trying to grapple, for activists, we are still trying to grapple around how the state is protecting women, in my view, and in literature, I don't think that is really happening. And unfortunately, as I said, colonialism is to be blamed, is part of it, but also corruption and other political factors are also to be blamed.
Yeah, absolutely. I will also use the same approach that the two of you used, looking back at history and see how women have been violated, or how the state has been a catalyst for violence. So my research interest is mainly focused on post-1960s in Eritrea, and I want to look at in my research how women have been actively participating in state building or in nationalist movements, and what that has resulted, especially when it comes to gender equality and women's equality and women's rights in Eritrea. So looking at the 1960s and early 1970s, women were active participants in the nationalist movement. They took up arms. They were about 30 to 40% of the combatant armed force when Eritreans were fighting for their independence or to secure a national state. But a lot of scholars, and from my studies, what I have seen is when women were integrated within the nationalist army, or within, at the time, the largest group was the EPLF, when they were integrated with the nationalist army, the female sex was erased. And we see that how women had to mimic or emulate the masculine body or the masculine behaviors in order to fit into that militant society that was being created at the time. So after independence, those women, the combatant women who fought to secure independence, we see them being relegated or pushed back or marginalized by the civilian society or by the civil society that existed in Eritrea. And all of the talks of gender equality and women's equal access to resources slowly started to diminish in the post-conflict society, or post-conflict or post-independence Eritrea. And this is something extremely similar that we see throughout the continent of Africa, especially in societies that fought for independence. And I would say across the globe that women would be called to fight for be it nationalist movement, be it anti-colonial movements, be it some sort of revolutionary movement or war. And then once that war is over, women are pushed back to the domestic space. They are not given the rights that they were promised to, let's say. And we see this happening in Eritrea. And I want to also see this as part of state violence, how women's bodies are being used, how women's sex is being erased. And going back to what you just said, Namrata, about how the state is talked about within the nationalist narrative as a woman or a mother, a similar thing also happened within Eritrea. The state is referred to as the mother, or the fruits of the state are referred to as the fruits of the womb. So there is that imagery, that similarity that we see within how the narratives of nationalism or nationalist narratives want to depict the state as a woman or a mother. And so the project of protecting that state becomes the male or the men's project, or a masculine project. And then that female body becomes this victim that needs to be protected, which is quite contradictory. If you see, women are expected to join the nationalist movement in order to break free from the stereotypical image of this helpless victim that needs to be, saved and protected. But at the same time, you have the image of this mother, the nation or the state that needs to be saved, that needs to be protected. And even post-independence, the project of nation building becomes the men's project. We also see it in, and I'm sure my colleagues here would also add, we also see it in movements that are fighting against oppressive measures that are taken by the current government in Eritrea. We would call them as opposition groups, but I would say they are groups that are fighting against oppression, where we see the same trends happening, that nation building or fighting against oppression is seen as the male project or the men's project, and women are to be the beneficiaries of that project, but they're not given that equal part. Or if they are to participate, they have to mimic this masculine, identities or characters, or that we see happening, especially within militant societies. So what happened in post-independence in Eritrea, I wouldn't want to take up much of the time, because we are essentially talking about similar events and similar experiences. What happened in post-independence in Eritrea is that women, we see them getting relegated and then not getting equal access to social and economic resources. As we've talked about, the state is generating violence, especially when it comes to women's sexual and reproductive health. Women do not get to decide when to become mothers or if they want to become mothers, and those measures that are taken by the state can really hurdle women's progress, especially within a patriarchal society. And not getting access, to social and economic resources makes women extremely vulnerable to violence. And in Eritrea, we have this indefinite national service. Some of you are familiar with it. I would not go to an extended definition of what national service is and what it looks like. We can all Google it at this time and find out. But within the national service itself, we don't recognize the fact that women and men, or girls and boys, experience it differently. The gendered aspect of this experience is what lacks in our conversations, especially within the Eritrean society and the Eritrean community. We don't talk about how women experience this national service, how different their experiences and how it impacts their lives compared to the boys or men. these discussions, I think, fail to be had because there is that always, what do you call, that the cloud that is always taking over this discussion, that's always taking over, that the country is in its approach to build a nation. We are, at a state of war, or these discussions should take, the back seat. We're not there yet. We cannot engage within, these conversations yet. So yes, these things, I would say, result to or culminate to state violence within my specific geographical location. And if any of the women from Eritrea that we have here would like to add, I would encourage you to add regarding state violence in Eritrea before we proceed with the rest of our questions. Do we have anyone? Okay, all right. So we'll proceed with the rest of our questions. So talking about women's movements, Anima, you hinted on that and you started talking about it. So I'll go to you first. And I'm sure because that is part of your research area, you look at women's movements. So what are some women's movements doing at this time, or how do you see women's movements or activist movements or feminist movements tackling state violence against women within your area of research? Yeah.
Women in Ghana have always been resistant, not just in Ghana, women all over Africa. We've always been resisting violence against us. Some of them are not documented, of course. We already understand that even literature is heavily dominated by men, but we can make examples of Nawal Sadawi from Egypt. Various Yasantu of Ghana fought against the colonialists because of some of the rules that they restricted on market women in Ghana, and they felt that, women are not having their own space to have economic security. They really fought. I mean, some of them were killed in their fight, like Yasan, and other people were captured, and some people had to go to exile. But what currently we have to our advantage as women, I would say, is social media. Because we have states who infringe on our rights, so we can't even go to the media to discuss certain issues that are affecting us. Even when we do, they feel tight, they edit it. Sometimes you write something to the newspapers and you read it like, is that what I wrote? Because the editors are editing it to suit their so-called house style. But social media has given us a space where you can be unfiltered. You can say whatever you want and speak your mind out, talk about your own experience with violence. Social media has become a space where women are finding each other and finding comfort in each other. You realize that there are lots of African feminist movements on social media who are connecting with each other. So for instance, there's a group in Ghana called Pepedem Ministries. They are affiliated with a lot of Nigerian feminist groups, a lot of Kenyan feminist groups, South African, all over Africa, because women are beginning to connect our stories and realize that, wow, it's the same everywhere. We keep on being regarded as the second citizen everywhere on this motherland that we have. We keep on not having a voice in important spaces like political spaces, economic spaces. And then the state and the government are continually reinforcing patriarchy through institutions and social structures. And so women, I won't say that they are different from those who did it earlier. There are a lot of women who did a lot of things for us. But because of social media, women are finding each other and our voices are becoming stronger. So when the Nigerian girl was raped in church by about 4 men and killed because she was raped brutally and then killed, every woman everywhere, it wasn't just Nigeria, the hashtag was going around, and rape in Nigeria was going around everywhere, everybody mentioning her name. people tweeted about it, people talked about their own experiences. And as soon as the hashtag went viral, magically the perpetrators were caught. It's as if they just appeared because they saw that we were angry. We are trying to tell them that why can't we have space? Why is it that every narrative that is directed towards safety, it's like, okay, so if you don't go out at night, it won't happen to you. What about if we put structures in place, women can walk out at night like men do? And so I believe that most feminist organizations or gender organizations nowadays, especially those who have used social media as their platform, is united against the fight for women. We also, what I've also observed is that they also understand the intersectionalities that go on. Some of us are privileged. We've had to come to study here. So we may be in the middle class or all of that. There are women who don't have that privilege to even talk about the violence that they have. It is something that I've found that these current activists are also understanding the importance of having an intersectional lens and using that to critique the issues that are happening to women all over. But as I had already mentioned, the fight is just beginning because in as much as we use social media, in fact, I know that there are some countries where they even censor social media. People cannot do it. The only thing that I have is that when I interview some women, they even have surrogates. They use some names on social media, pseudonyms, like they use, they don't show themselves when they are talking about issues. They intentionally do that so that they won't face troubles, not just in the society, but even in their own homes. Because you find their own parents, their own, even women in their own community telling them that what you're doing is not good. But at least we have this brilliant weapon and we can use that weapon to bring attention, the whole world's attention to some of the issues that we face in our societies and the world at large.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Anima. I also see similar trend within the Eritrean community using pseudonyms and continuing activism on the cyberspace. Yeah. Oh, Namrata, what are some women's organizations that you know of and those who are actively working to fight against state violence?
I would actually like to take off of what Anima was saying about intersectionality and establish that, again, that in India, any particular movement definitely does not address all Indian women at the same time.
Absolutely.
Because we have caste, class, religion, and region-based, ethnicity-based identities. But I can definitely, I would like to talk about the areas where women have organized and protested, got laws in place, got policies changed. I think the first one that I would want to talk about would be dowry deaths. And so dowry is a tradition within the institution of marriage, where the woman's family gives money, gifts, land, whatever, whatever is the amount asked for from the groom's family to the groom and to the family. So, and that is, that is an offshoot of India being a patriarchal society, and that is why women were considered a burden. When when a girl child was born in a family, it was never a celebration. That also meant that forthcoming expenditures, because you have to feed the child. She will never turn into a working hand and a contributor to the family income. Instead, she would actually take part of the family wealth to another household. So the sense of belonging was never given to the woman in terms of the maternal home. So this was the first thing I think that I would want to talk about, that now, and this was addressed back in the 50s and 60s, where women's organizations and also international organizations protested. Women actually went out on the roads, organized rallies, and protested with placards and slogans. And now there is a law in place that if anybody is reported or seen taking or giving dowry, then that is a punishable offense with a sentence in jail and a fine. So that is on paper. But the unfortunate offshoot of this is that it still continues in the form of gifts. Now, you don't say, I'm asking you actually give gifts to your daughters and you take
Exactly.
gifts for your son and your son's family. But at the same time, I would say that the state did address it and there are laws in place for that. Another very, very big problem that India had was, and because it was actually an offshoot of dowry, a female feticide, that there was no so in India, if a pregnant woman wants to get an ultrasound to know the gender of the child, that is not allowed. That is a punishable offense. You cannot get an ultrasound to know the gender of the child, because what was in practice was that women by force used to be taken to nursing homes to determine the gender of the child, and if they got to know that it was going to be a girl child, it would, a miscarriage would be forced upon a woman, or any other procedure would be carried out for her not to give birth to that child. And in certain other occasions, if that could not be intercepted at that point, then right after the birth the girl child would be killed. And different parts of the country have had different practices as to how to go about that. Some would just take a big pot of water and drown the child in it. Some would directly bury the child right after birth, and so on. So the government has now in place policies where getting your fetus's gender determined is a punishable offense, and no nursing home, at least legally, can do it. But at the same time, and this is actually the most recent, I think about 15 days ago, there was a news item where a girl child was found stuffed in a gunny sack by the roadside. So apparently parents just decided to leave her there to die, and fortunately she was just found by um, a good person walking down that road, and was taken to a hospital and is now surviving. Um, Out of the most recent ones, and this is more of an urban, a very, very recent protest that is still taking place, an organization that is still in place. It is called Pinjra Tod. Pinjra means a cage, and Tod is to break. So break the cage. That is a movement that is going on. And when I say it's urban, is because the college-going girl students organize this against hostel regulations, because there are curfews set. When I say curfew, that every hostel, also to establish that in certain universities in the country, women and men hostels are segregated. There are no curfews on men's hostels or boys' hostels, but there are time curfews set on women hostels. So here is a group of young, aware, and very, very brave girls who organize this movement. Unfortunately, two of the leading girls from that protest are right now in jail because they organized this, and they're seen as anti-nationals for organizing this movement. So this is the most recent. I would also like to talk about Shakthi Shalini. This is an organization, an NGO that my theatre group works very closely with. They have been working with women almost for 20 years now. They have organized a shelter home for women who are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, and similarly, organized violence against women. What they offer to the women in this shelter is support in terms of mental health. So we organize workshops for women to sort of sometimes become functional again, how to deal with trauma, how to maybe if they want to find jobs, then we help them find jobs. If they want to go back to their maternal homes or to go back to their families, that is again the choice of the woman. If they need any kind of therapy, then the organization also arranges for that, or medical help in that. It also provides shelter to the woman till the time she decides to stay there. So of course it has its challenges, the seats are not always available. So of course, any other organization, this organization also has its challenges, but I would say that and not only Shakthi Shalini, there are many other such organizations that are constantly working for women.
Well, that's
So
great. Well, go ahead, please. It's great to know that there are so many organizations and movements that are actively working.
I think I would also like to talk particularly about one aspect, and that is the Dalit women and girls. Dalit is the lowest caste category within Hinduism. And when I talk about the lowest caste category, it also, historically, it used to also limit their options of occupation. Because of your caste, you could only do certain kind of jobs and not certain other kind of jobs. And those were the lowest of the low. For example, jobs such as scavenging and so on. Um, um, Over a period of time, it seemed as if it was justified to rape a Dalit girl, and it was okay. It was also a way out for the caste above to constantly put the Dalits in their place. If you try to question, then we'll rape your women. If a Dalit woman is trying to say, okay, maybe I don't want to do this task, then you're raped. So again, just trying to put a little more focus on the Dalit girl and the Dalit woman. It is again a very, very recent phenomenon in the Indian constitutional history, somewhere around, I think, the 1990s, when a certain reservation was offered to the Dalit community uh, uh, and the tribal community. I hate to use the word tribal, but that is how the constitution states it. The scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes of India, that they would get a certain reservation in educational institutions and in government jobs. So that has given some entry point to Dalit men and women into the, let's say, the mainstream society, but at the same time, not still being able to access the core or the central space of the society. They're still relegated to the margins. So how this movement or this policy change has received its backlash, and how the community constantly, has to be on a defensive. There are things like, oh, you are here by reservation and not by merit. And then the question is, what is merit? Because if you have a history, ancestral history of generation after generation not allowed to access education or work to better your economic conditions, then what kind of merit are we talking about? If I have a family which speaks and understands English from 3 generations before, and you're the first English speaker in your family, there is no comparison in terms of merit. And why I'm using English as a parameter here, unfortunately, in India, if you are English speaking, many more avenues are open to you, and also globally. So those are very, very subtle and little sort of check marks that you have to be conscious of when particularly when we talk about women, and more with regards to intersectionality.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Namrata. Well, sadly, in Eritrea, there aren't any civil societies. The only women's organization that exists now is the one that was established by the nationalist movement in the 1970s, that worked for the nationalist movement and now currently works for the current government. And so it is, when you think about it, there isn't any autonomous women's group that is actively working for women. I find it hard to believe that a women's organization that was established by a nationalist movement and now works for the current government is actively working to fight against state violence. Well, so we can understand that.
Yes,
the problems with that. The problems with that. And so there aren't any organizations within the country that are actively working to speak to women's needs and to fight for women's rights and women's equality. Of course, progress has been made in terms of female genital circumcision, in terms of women inheriting land and owning land, in terms of women going to school and getting access to education. There have been campaigns to raise awareness, especially in the early days of independence or the independence euphoria. There were a lot of those campaigns and some introductions of some NGOs that we see within the history of Eritrea. But currently, majority of women's organizations, or those that exist and say they actively work for women's equality or actively work for to eradicate gender-based violence within the country, reside in the diaspora. They were established in the diaspora and then they reside in the diaspora. These are the organizations that are detached, in my opinion, some that are detached from any political party, that are autonomous women's groups that are fighting for gender violence. Now, there are a lot of disadvantages with being outside of the country and fighting for gender-based violence within the country, because you're not in the you're not within the country, and whatever fight that you have and whatever policies that you would like to implement would only be on paper, and those are the disadvantage that those groups also acknowledge. But one of the co-founders of the Network of Eritrean Women, a group that is actively working to eradicate or to fight against or bring awareness at least to the gender-based violence. One of the co-founders is here with us, Khadija, and maybe she would like to say something about the history of the organization or give us a short, brief summary of what the organization fights for. In my opinion, that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the rest of our audience here, that is the only organization that currently exists that I know of, besides the one that operates for the state in the country. So I cannot think of organizations like the ones that you two have been talking about and the ones that you two have mentioned that are actively working within the country and working to eradicate any forms of violence within the country. I cannot think of any one single autonomous women's organization. Khadija, would you like to say something about the Network of Eritrean Women and the work that it does?
Yeah, I will say a little bit. Thank you. It was very interesting and enlightening presentation. I would say it has raised lots of issues that we sometimes not think about. It has triggered so many issues, isn't it? Thank you so much for this enlightening session. Yes, as the Anima said, obviously, just to take on from what you have just said, in Eritrea, there isn't any independent, autonomous women's organization. And Anima mentioned social media. Social media has given us unfiltered and uncensored space where we can voice our concerns, our voices. And this is also how Network of Eritrean Women was created. We met over Facebook. I remember, checking this name. Look, this name sounds like Eritrean name. Just befriending, hunting Eritrean women, myself and my colleagues, obviously. And then just a few months after we met in Sweden, which is in 2014, March 2014, we met and created a coordinating committee to carry on the work that has started pre-independence. Obviously, it's in the 1960s as well, 1967, and then went on until independence. Obviously, as you mentioned, as Therese mentioned, it was a different kind of struggle during independence. They just want us to be equal in carrying arms, not really, focusing on in our participation in all aspects of the revolution. And then it was sadly, shattered post-independence. So all the issues that you mentioned, I was kind of reflecting. For example, you mentioned about the language aspect of it at the moment. If you don't speak, for example, if you are not from the city, you are more disadvantaged as well. So there are so many things that we would have done if we were in Eritrea. There aren't any data. Not only there aren't any data, but the government and the national women, the Eritrean
National Union of Eritrean Women.
They also, kind of support, or they are collaborating with the government in violating women's rights. I would say, I can't just sum it up, like that, because if they don't stand up for women, if they deny, I hope you will be able to read our CEDAW presentation in Geneva, the last in February, where one of our colleagues participated. The leaders of the national women, the National Union of Eritrean Women, they kind of minimized the violence, and there isn't any national action plan to end violence against women. So you can just simply say they are also perpetrating violence against women, which is sadly. Another point I want to make is earlier on, Therese, you asked about, you spoke about the opposition and the state of women in the opposition. The challenge that we get is that these women, obviously in Eritrea, there isn't social media. It's very limited social media. So that also hinders or prevents women to know what is going on about, in the world about women. So they have very limited kind of access to internet or to television programs. I was interpreting for someone, and this is just a recent arrival, and she said they just watch Turkish love films that are, what you call this, translated into even Tigrinya, I would say. So all that kind of makes women to become submissive, shall I say, or to become unaware of their rights. And when they come here, usually we work with them. We do offer some support, especially in the UK, and we can see the level of awareness of their rights is extremely low. In regard to the women within the opposition, what is sad is when they join the opposition, they are there to support the men, as if they are supporters, not with the notion of that they can lead or they can take initiative. Like نحواتنا خنحجزهم, for example, we want to support our brothers. We lack leaders, but when you say it in Tigrinya, it is in male kind of language. زمرحونا سئنا, not even زمرحنا, زمرحونا سئنا. حدا ما راح يسئنا. We couldn't find a leader, like for the male. So all this, your presentations triggered all those things which we have to think about, and hopefully, you know, things will change in the future. But if not, social media, as you said, they're doing such kind of work can penetrate and hopefully raise awareness for women in Eritrea.
Thank you. Thank you, Khadija. So this is my last question. And with that question, I also would like to ask our participants and our discussants with us today, what would you say is the way forward? Or how do you think we can achieve progress with the way things are at the moment? And of course, the pandemic has created a lot of issues, and it has exacerbated gender-based violence in multiple communities. But keeping everything in mind, what would you say is the way forward? And after Namrata, you can go ahead, and then Anima, and then the rest of our participants, you can ask your questions or give us some comments and suggestions. And with that, we will end our discussion for today. Go ahead, Namrata.
Okay, so I think I've thought about this so many times, and I wonder how we can fix this all. But I think the starting step, the first step, has to be to stop looking at women through their social roles. I don't want, when I look at a woman, I don't want to see her as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, as a daughter-in-law. I want to see her as a woman first and see where her potential is or what she wants to make of her life. Definitely have education programs for women, irrespective of caste, class, race, all of that. We need extensive education programs for women. We definitely need, if need be, reservations, because if you have been pushed back for generations, you need that push coming from the state. Your state has to be taking responsibility of its women citizens and giving them that push. So if it means reservation, I would say yes, that does not make me a lesser citizen because I was pushed back first. So I do not feel shy from taking or accepting reservation. I think that's definitely, if it is instituted honestly, and if it is instituted keeping the interest of the women in mind. So yes, reservations wherever needed. I would say definitely a lot of economic independence for a woman, because when you are, and let me put it in as crass a way as possible, when you have money in your pocket, your decision is your own, and it is not dependent on another person's pocket or another person's wallet. So it is sounding very crass, but let's be crass about it. Women need their own money at all times, money that they have earned, not money that they have received or asked for, money that they have earned on their own, so that they can be decision makers for their own lives. So I think these are a few, in my understanding, I want to see a woman as a worker because she is a worker at all times. If you say I'm a homemaker, no, you're still working. So let's recognize these areas which have constantly put women in a lesser citizen category. Oh, you stay at home, but the home is functioning because I am working inside the house. Otherwise, the home is going to collapse, and you will not be productive the next day. So I am making the man productive. Let me recognize that. So I would say that we definitely need to empower. And when I say empower, it's actually giving her economic independence, economic choices, and the decision making has to be hers. Let for once have a woman decide for herself what she wants. And that's about it. I think that's the way ahead. And of course, global organizations, national organizations, regional organizations. So what I'm trying to say is that, if we look at it through concentric circles, let's have very, very base root organizations that are addressing individual problems, and then also larger organizations which are keeping a balance between, let's say, one one party not getting ahead of the other. That would be my plan of action.
Anyone?
I would like to ask something. I don't know if it's a question. It's more like I suddenly thought of something when Namrata was talking. I agree. The starting point is to empower women to stimulate their self-esteem once they know and recognize the problem that the change would come from women. That's also how I see it. But I was thinking while you were talking, Namrata, in the case of Eritrean young women, the younger generations, because the country being a closed society, intentionally so, they don't know any different. And you get to a point that rape and violence has become the norm. So how do you approach these kind of girls and women in attempting to empower them?
Thank you, and I can attempt to answer it. Because I would say that India was no different when it gained independence. Women were quite limited and very, very, education was available, but not everybody availed of it. It was not considered good to know more than your husband. You wouldn't, if you were way too educated, then oh my God, all the men are already over, and you will never get married, and that's the doom. But I would say the way out is first to create awareness campaigns that be aware that this is a closed box and there is a world outside, and there is a possibility to step outside this closed box, and that can only happen if you're aware that these are other options that are available. So let's say if awareness campaigns are organized where women are presented with women role models and not male role models. So if for example, you yourself, who is here at a certain platform, is a role model for the women in your country, because here you are, who's aware, who's talking. So that's a step. That's the first step. So giving examples, encouraging them to try to understand that there is not only one way of life, but there is a possibility of other ways. I would say that would be the first step. And then obviously, certain efforts have to come from the state, where it has to institute policies and laws to protect the education of women, to protect women against sexual assault and violence. So it will have to institute laws against rape, such that the normalcy of rape is no longer there, that rape is not normal. It has to have repercussions for the rapist or for the institutions that are normalizing it. So I would say it has to be collaborative between activists and people like Teresa and yourself and the state. State has to take responsibility at some point, and whether that means mass organizations, whether that means organizing awareness campaigns. So I would say that would be definitely the first step. Let's begin with schools. Let's start, that 1 hour of let's say awareness class in a school. Let's add this to the curriculum, and let's begin there.
Yeah.
And if schools are limited, then we can then small campaigns can be organized where this body moves from region to region, taking the campaign to the people if the people cannot come to the campaign.
Right.
Sure.
I would say that, and these are not, of course, my ideas. This is also partly coming from the history, that I've read about India's independence struggle. Because when the campaign against the British, when the people could not collect, there were theatre activists who actually spread out through the country and explained to them how British were oppressing them. So I think I'm borrowing that idea from there.
It's a good one. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Just to add to what Namrata just said also, I would say in addition to the campaigns and the state taking a mandate to educate and make its citizens aware, we need to educate young girls about their rights at a very, very early age. And those educators need to be from local communities, need to be those who are empowered and educated within local communities. Those are the only agents that can spread this awareness to any community that we're talking about, especially within our country, Eritrea. But Fabian, if you don't have any more questions, Anima, way forward, if you could give us some of your ideas, and then the rest of, yeah.
I'm thinking Namrata has summarized some of these policies that we can put in place. However, I always say that, for instance, enacting laws, we need the state to do it. And the state, we've already recognized that the state is not an active participant of women's empowerment. For instance, having rape as a criminal law, we need the state, and every time it goes back to the same thing. So I think I think that the job really lies on activists.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time we say something, we put pressure on the government, that's when things work. I gave the example of the girl who was raped recently in Nigeria. When we continually meet with state officials to say, this is what we want, they tell us, yeah, we are trying to, and it never happens. They've done it so many times to us. So we should use our voice. Hearing all that you said about Eritrea, I just kept on thinking, we need to make the world know what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
We need to put much more light. That's why these conversations are important. You had this conversation with all of us, because now I know, now I'm going to talk about it, now I'm going to tweet about it, now I'm going to Facebook it. I want people to know, I want the world to, because the more we all put pressure on these so-called state figures, that is when their structures start breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
The only progress we can have as women is through activism. And this is the only way we can do it. Even when we try, you see, behavioral change, from what I understand, from what I've learned from my own experience, when HIV, we were talking about HIV to people, behavioral change is very difficult for people. Even when you are fighting for women, because patriarchy is so institutionalized in our society, it's the same woman who tell you, why, if I'm beaten by my husband, it's okay, but this is nothing. She was just raped. Everybody goes through rape, making it like it's normal. Yeah. So it's very difficult to even go and even tell people, hey, this is what you should do. That is why we need to, I don't want to use the word, let me say, it should be aggressively, that's the proper word I should say, done.
Yep.
It should be aggressively done, and we should institute it so much so that we raise the next generation of children that we bring to this world should be different. I always say, nothing can change if we don't change the way we raise men and women. Mm-hmm. The way we continually raise girls to say, okay, this is how it's, oh, you're a woman, so it's okay. You don't have to be aggressive. Yeah. You're a woman, so the way you are speaking, be careful, you'll not be accepted in the society. Or just telling women that their apex is only marriage. Like, remember, you can't do this if you don't know how to cook, you can't go to your husband's house. But telling men, oh, it's okay, you can treat women anyway. That's how women are. Women need to be disciplined. If you continually tell children that way, that is how they grow up to be. Our socialization is deeply flawed. That is where the roots, we need to, it should be an aggressive thing. I'm so tired of government. I know they don't do anything. They have all this political language that they give us and say, oh, we are doing this, yes. And they intentionally use women to insult us. They put women in charge of this. So Minister for Women and Gender in Ghana will say something so bizarre, and you think about it like, how is this happening? That you are using a woman to insult me this way, so that I feel it's within my bones. And then they come and say, women are against each other. Meanwhile, they perpetuated that. So the only way is through aggression. We are not going to take this laying down. We need to connect with each other, like they share our stories. That is the only way we can do it. We need to bring much more attention to what is happening in Eritrea, what is happening in India, what is happening in Ghana. Anybody who is on this platform, whatever we share there, we are not going to end. We should have much more conversations. When you want
consistently,
to have programs, you want to have programs, share it with us. We also share that, oh, there's going to be a webinar on this and that in Eritrea. Let's talk about it. You can join. Let's share this so that the whole conversation starts. We start putting pressure on these structures of society. That is the only way we can break them. Because Namrata, I tell you, I know that what you present is very nice. I wish people will even listen, the government will even listen, make these things happen. But we've come to know that just like Fanon said, the only way we can get liberty, freedom, is through the same language that they are using against us. The only language that men and institutions and political figures understand is violence. That's what they think. When they think about women, that's all that comes to their mind. We have to use that same vehicle to tell them that we want to be free from them. We have to use the same aggression to tell them we want to be free from them. We are tired of the diplomatic language. We are not here for that, because the more we become diplomat, the more we become, we concede to the fact that, oh, even sometimes when things are done, we're like, oh, thank you. No, thank you. This should have been done. You don't have to. You don't have to. Thank you for my right to live. And that's what happens. The more we thank, the more when I even came, I made women this. I made women my vice president. You did not make woman your vice president. It's supposed to be done. That's how the society is. So I'm very glad when when Khadija was talking about issues, all the things that was spinning in my mind was like, how I'm going to write about this. People need to know. People need to become aware of how society continually subjugates women. In these modern times, women, my fellow women somewhere cannot even voice their frustration out because of these restrictions that are put in place. And so, yes, we need to be diplomatic sometimes, but it is time for us to form a revolution. It is time for them to pay attention to us. We are tired. Nothing will stop us. The government will not stop us. Religion will not stop. Nothing is going to stop us. We need to communicate with each other, share each other's stories. Anytime there's something going on, Teresa, let me know. Share it with me. I'm going to share it anytime I'm in the program. Anytime there's a workshop, I'm going to share it so that everybody will join, and then we can make the world know what we are going through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anima. Thank you very much. Just to add to what you two have already stated, and what I would say is we need our institutions and our state to reflect the society. We need it to reflect the people, not just to give women symbolic power, but to give women who are advocates, who can advocate for the rights and for the needs of their communities, a chance within the state and institutions. We need to see it to be reflected. That said, Nasra has raised her hand, and I think she has a question or a comment, and then I'll give a chance to some of us, and we will end.
My question is similar, like Favan asks, like Namrata and Anima. We, as a country, we are way back. We can't make any change right now, or we can't raise any awareness because of the communication we got with back home. But we can't leave it as well. We are lots of people here, Eritrean women and girls. How can we approach those women and girls? It's really hard to open a conversation with them or talking to them. They don't know nothing. Even if they know as well, like it's a shame to talk about your husband or your brother, or father, any man. And the other, my other question as well, how can we involve men? Because men can convince men more if they believe, and how they can make it easy.
Great.
So if one of you,
So how can we involve men, and how can we communicate with those in the diaspora approach in
Yeah.
the diaspora or back home?
Yeah, diaspora.
Okay, okay. It's in the diaspora.
What I would say is that you are right. That's exactly what I said. It's very difficult for you to go somewhere and tell people that your behavior is harming you. But my experience with development work that I've done a little bit is that always don't go in like you are. Let's not make a mistake of perpetuating the same oppressor's language, thinking that, okay, yeah, I screwed abroad, so yeah, this is me. You people are in shambles and you need to get out of here. That's, and normally doesn't work. What normally I do is that I don't take myself out of the situation. I always navigate the conversation around we. This thing happening to us is so painful. I've been through this. I even share my experience. I role model by sharing my experience that I had to go through this, and I didn't know that the world outside is so beautiful that women can have chance to do something else. I thought this was just my worldview. This is all that I needed, and not knowing that there are other opportunities that we can have, and then bring out certain things that I would think is shameful in my community. So, for instance, recently on my family platform, we decided to have conversations about the rights of other people who identify differently when it comes to sexuality. And I know it's shameful for them. They can't speak about it. And people were, even whilst I was talking about, people were sending me private text messages, are you trying to, what are you trying to? I was like, no, if I talk about these issues, that is when they feel like, okay, this person is a part of us and she's saying this. So probably, so even if I've been abused before, I'm going to talk about it. It's painful, but I use that platform to talk about a lot of abuse that I've faced through my education, through probably a family member, and talk about how it was difficult for me to navigate everything, but I understand the difficulty, and that's why I'm here, so that I will lean a hand to you. That's something that you are going through. What I've also found is that most women want to break out, just like you said, but they're afraid. So when you start coming in constantly telling them you're able to break, then they are able to open up. So let me use this analogy, especially for people who identify with the LGBTQ community. When they go into communities that are okay with them, they open up freely, like, hey, this is me. But when they go into communities that restrict them, they coil up. So it's the same thing with women. What I've realized is that, especially when we remove them from men, when we're having these conversations, they open up more. They're like, oh yeah. So since you are saying this same thing happened to me, but I didn't know how to say it. Even though I'm telling you all of this, behavioral change is difficult. All we can say is that we can try as much as possible to talk about it without, there shouldn't be any filter. Talk about it, really talk about it. I mean, definitely take it. I should say there's no filter, but also please take care of yourself. I know that they intentionally kill women when women try to open up. But then also, like I talked about in the socialization part, what we can do is that if we find a man who has a little bit or an iota of women sensitization in him, we can rope them in and say, hey, you know, for us, women empowerment is also about identifying men who agree with us. Like James is here. James is an actor of the continent. So we bring him everywhere because we know he understands us. So why can't we are having this program. Can you also talk with the men on this end? That's when men too will get, I know that Namrata, you might have stories. I know that the Sinka Suk, they intentionally targeted men so that domestic violence will stop in India. I'm sure you have a lot of stories to tell us, but we can try and do that. Notwithstanding that, we can't force ourselves. If we find them, yes, we use them, but then we should root it into our socialization so that men will grow up understanding that, hey, this space is for all of us. We can all grab anything that we like. So probably I'll leave it to Namrata to expand on how that's one also.
I'm really happy that you brought in the, finding allies in men. I also look at it from the other point of view, where men are equal targets of patriarchy. It's not that they don't suffer within patriarchy. To constantly have the pressure that you have to be the breadwinner of the family, to be masculine in a certain way. Let's try to open those conversations where men do not want to be that way and are pushed to be a certain way. We always assume that a person who is we always assume that a man is happy in a man's role. They are under tremendous pressure, and let's explore that as an area to be more inclusive, because now we are also talking about problems that men face because of patriarchy. A very simple sentence like men will be men, what does that even mean? Why do they have to be men always? And what does being a man imply? That, oh, if there is a bigger bag to carry, that I will carry. What if if you're running 100 fever and you're physically unable to carry a bag? Will you not tell the woman walking next to you to carry the bag? Yes, you probably should tell her to carry the bag because she's physically more able to carry the bag.
Yep.
But in that moment, in patriarchal societies like ours, the man is going to be forced to be the man and continue to carry the bag at the risk of killing himself. So I think these are certain things that we can definitely maybe at least start talking about to men, that how patriarchy is affecting their lives negatively. What does it mean to constantly stand up to pressure? What does it mean to be a man, to only have certain kind of career options and not certain others? For example, in India, if a man says, I want to be a dancer, 20 years ago, this would be like, oh, you're effeminate. You cannot be a dancer. That is not a career choice. So maybe, roping in the men into these conversations, trying to understand them also as victims of patriarchy. It does not mean that if patriarchy is instituted by men, it cannot victimize men. It does actually end up victimizing men. And the other thing I would actually like to borrow from Sarah Ahmed, she is my favorite feminist of the times, who actually said that she did not learn her feminism from the West. Uh, she was Pakistani born and raised in Britain. And she says that she actually learned more of her feminism from her aunties back in Pakistan every time they sat and had conversations together. So maybe that is the starting point for us. If we cannot break into, let's say, government institutions and offices and, maybe hold placards every time to their faces, maybe we can step back and go back into our households and start conversations there. Simple thing like, I still remember, and this is unfortunate, that there was no conversation about menstrual hygiene in my house when I was growing up. It was very convenient for them to think, oh, it will happen in school, so let her learn from there. What if my school did not do it responsibly? Or what if my teacher thought that was not okay to talk about? So I was left thinking, oh my God, I don't know what is happening or how to go about this. So many girls every day bring in, get infections and suffer because of that so much. So, simple conversation like that. And then I think those also, if you have the freedom to talk about yourself and your body, then you develop that sense of freeing your mind as well. Simple thing like how much, and in India, it is still a problem in so many families when food is laid out on a table. Men are asked to eat first.
In Ghana too.
Can we break that? Can we say, let us all eat together? For a minute, can we say, let the women eat first? All my growing up years, I never saw my mother eat first. And that still hurts me. Why? Why should she be the last one to eat?
She's the one doing the
cooking. She was the one cooking for everybody. She should get to eat first. So, little things like, can we start those little trends and little, and Sarah Ahmed calls these creating sticky situations. They'll be sticky in the beginning. They'll be very hard to break. But, maybe we can find a breakthrough through those little things that we do at home.
I'm glad that you brought up the idea that we get these notions of feminism and equality and women's rights growing up in our own domestic spaces and at home, and we don't get these ideologies and we don't get these lessons from the West. And that's why a lot of women's organizations and women's groups are always stigmatized, because there is this fear that they're going to be, indoctrinating the society with Western ideologies and Western notions and Western lessons. And that's not true, because this example that you just gave about your mother not eating first and the questions that you had, these are feminist thoughts and feminist ideas that you had early on at a very early age. And you didn't get that from the West. The same in my household, in my own family. I can share similar examples where men eat, the best food. We know about the story of the chicken, but best parts of the chicken are served for the men. The wings are reserved for the women. It's, this whole practices and traditional cultural practices that we have. And we have these questions early on growing up, and they're suppressed. They make us to suppress them. Culture and society makes us suppress those notions and those ideas, and we bury them and we kill them as we grow up because we're forced by the culture and the society to do so. But these thoughts and these ideas grow up with us. These are not lessons that we're getting from the West. We're coming up with these ideologies. And so starting a conversation just like that, and having those conversations that are an open space, sharing our experiences just like this, sharing our stories, I would say is one way to include men and move forward.
And also, just to add just a little bit, like all of you said, we have stories, we have feminist stories in our cultures that we can use. We don't have to use examples. For instance, like as I said, the typical Akan culture in Ghana, you can find stories where women did certain things, where women had certain rules that you can use to say that, but this is not how we used to be. Our society used to be that and that. Don't you remember they said this woman lived and did this and that? So why is it that now it's like it? So there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. It could be a good example. I also think that we should also, we ourselves should defy stuff. For instance, I know that bride price, like you said, in your case is the reverse, but as far as the men pay the price.
Is the men who pay the bride price?
Yes.
The dowry it comes from the bride's family.
The men pay the price, but when they pay them, they use it as a hindrance, like we bought you, so we can't do anything to you. So some women go through violence in the house and they can't go back home because they can't repay on their parents' time. Hey, we've spent the money, we don't come to us and stay. Women die for that. And I know that's especially common in Eastern Africa. Even though that's, if I'm so, I know I'm strong enough, if I want to leave a marriage, I will leave it right now. But I'm resisting it for other women too. I don't have to, I'm resisting for other women in Kenya, in other parts of the world. Like, I don't even want to hear about a bride price thing. And every time I bring it up, maybe my mom will say, but that's I said, that wasn't tradition, please. We didn't know about cell phones, giving cell phones. Where was the cell phone? What are you saying? It wasn't tradition. We didn't have all this. It wasn't material. It wasn't this capitalist thing that we have. It was something that was sentimental, like, oh, we are just giving you this as a form of taking care of. But now you've made it into a certain new model. Yeah. You are using it to subjugate women. So when I'm like, I'm still following tradition. It's just yours is different. So we can use our own little things to resist those stuff. And I think little girls in our families will look up to us and say, wow, yeah, and you must say she doesn't want this. I don't want, I've told my mom, if I'm ever getting married, they shouldn't dare give me a Bible and tell me I have the spiritual responsibility. So I should carry the marriage and always make the man do whatever they want, and I have that. I'm not doing that. If they give me a Bible, I also give the man a Bible. It's equal. Yeah. So all these little things that we have in a society that was washed by colonialism, that was washed by all this revolution and the erasure of us, we can still look at it and bring it back and use that as a form of resistance. And that's, I think, Namrata and Teresa and all of you bring all these important points. So,
all right, so we have time for one or two more questions, and then we will conclude. Or any comments anyone would like to make?
Well, I was, this last conversation that we've had, it's really enlightening, because I was thinking it means that the fight is tougher within our own household or addressing women than when we are addressing men, because men, it's not that they don't understand or they don't know what they're doing, just they do it because that's convenient to them. While women, they have basically been brainwashed. They have grown to believe that what the patriarchy says is true.
Yeah.
So in removing that, is the fight tougher when we're dealing with women, our sisters, than when we're dealing with men. So I agree that being an example and showing them that there is another side would be the best strategy. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Shall I just come into this as well? You know, just the question of how can we reach out to these women? As new, we do from time to time run workshops, and also we have like coffee sessions, like safe spaces only for women. It is through these sessions that we are able to reach, you know, significant amount of women, I would say. And I think we need to continue doing this, as well as also working with men allies, which we have already to some extent have done few sessions with the men as well. And we are now identifying who are our allies, as you said, you know, men that are a bit sensitized and so on. So yeah, let's carry on with utilizing the safe spaces and, you know, coffee sessions. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. And James, thank you for being
an
example to the other sex, to the other gender. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
All right. So do we have any other questions? All right. So we will end here.
I just wanted to say a little something.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It was a really wonderful session, and thank you so much, everyone. I think all these stories brought up. I am from Eritrea as well, and it did bring up a lot of stories that I really did not realize that they were violence, or like that they were kind of like hidden and just put aside. And I had all these questions. So how do we navigate this? Our state is not really being supportive, and the environment is not supportive. We, the women, are not being supportive, siding with whatever the culture or the religion is saying. And I think I like the idea that Anima shared, like sharing those stories and removing the shame attached to being a victim, and bringing these stories that we tell each other in confidence, without that means in an anonymity, like anonymously sharing it with within the society, and kind of like highlighting this as I think a very good first step. And thank you for bringing that up, so that these stories don't stay amongst us, you know, and so that the rest of us who haven't really gone through it know about it, our male counterparts know about it. And I do like the idea of putting pressure on the state by bringing these stories up. And so yes, I'm really thankful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Right. Do we have anyone else? Okay, so I think we can conclude here. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Anima. Thank you, Namrata, for participating and for leading this discussion, for facilitating this discussion, and for making us again realize that this is a global issue and we should all work together to eliminate gender-based violence. And thank you for hosting this event. And yeah, goodbye.
And thank you, Teresa, for making it possible.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.